Sure. All right.
All right.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Jason McCaskey. I am a registered dietitian and exercise physiologist. I worked at Hospital for Special Surgery for almost 9 years in their performance and wellness group, and I'm now in private practice. So I've worked with people range of ages, skills, orthopedic conditions, about living their healthiest and best lives, whether it be for sport, for general health, activities of daily living, health and weight management, etc. So I'm very glad to be here today. I came here through, I don't know if you know Marcy Simon, or if any of you know Marcy Simon. She has done activities through her organization, Generation Reform, and this great fall prevention class called Equilibrium that I think is being offered through the Isaac Center. It's great. I worked with her when she was founding it through her organization she was with prior. Now she's kind of doing it herself. It's a great class, very engaging. So again, if it's something you're interested in, I think it's available, and I'm sure Gemma has more information. So with that said, without further ado, let me share my screen. And the way I'm going to kind of try to organize this is I'm going to kind of go through like a section of information, stop for some Q&A. If a question gets asked that that I know I'm going to answer, I'll let you know, and then repeat, go through more information, talk about it, etc. And then at the end, there'll be time for Q&A. So hopefully there'll be lots of time to go through your specific questions. If I know the answer, I'll be happy to answer it. If I'm not entirely sure, I will do my due diligence and get back to you. So I like to say I know everything in the world, but I don't, even though my kids think they do. So what we'll start with is we're going to kind of go into, let me start the screen here. Okay, so first we're going to go into a brief background as far as what diabetes is and how it affects the body. For some of you, it might be a bit of a review, which is great. For those, if it's new information, I'm glad you're kind of being exposed to it. Then we'll talk about kind of the dietary or the nutrition related ways to manage diabetes. So some specifics as far as what kind of foods, carbs, fats, proteins, etc. What types of diets or ways of eating is best for diabetes. And then we'll kind of go into like a little bit of an introduction to carbohydrate counting, which is typically what's often done when you are using insulin for diabetes management. You can do it if you don't have, even if you're not on insulin, but it's a little more rigorous, and so it's a little more involved. So again, it's not as imperative if you're not on it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then a little bit just to drop on talking about the value of weight loss and physical activity in regards to blood sugar management and diabetes as well. And so as we go through, I'll be stopping for questions periodically, but I want to give you kind of a high level framework of what we'll be going over. So I found some really good videos that talk about what diabetes is. So I'm going to run to them. They're about 2 minutes each, but I think they're helpful. So hopefully everyone can hear them. And we'll start now. Can people hear it? Just thumbs up? No?
When you share your screen, I don't know if, what you may have to reshare, but when you share your screen, there's a little button on the bottom that says share my sound. Or share your sound.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Cool. Thank you for that. It's my first time trying to share sound. So let's try this again. And try that. And try this from the start.
Two main types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. They're different conditions, but they're both serious. There are some other rarer types of diabetes too. What all types of diabetes have in common is that they cause people to have too much glucose in their blood. But we all need some glucose. It's what gives us our energy. We get glucose when our bodies break down the carbohydrates that we eat or drink, and that glucose is released into our blood. We also need a hormone called insulin. It's made by our pancreas, and it's insulin that allows the glucose in our blood to enter our cells and fuel our bodies. If you don't have diabetes, your pancreas senses when glucose has entered your bloodstream and releases the right amount of insulin so the glucose can get into your cells. But if you have diabetes, this system doesn't work. When you've got type 1 diabetes, you can't make any insulin at all. If you've got type 2 diabetes, it's a bit different. The insulin you make either can't work effectively or you can't produce enough of it. In both types of diabetes, because glucose can't get into your cells, it begins to build up in your blood. And too much glucose in your blood causes a lot of different problems. To begin with, it leads to diabetes symptoms, like having to wee a lot, being incredibly thirsty, and feeling very tired. You may also lose weight, get infections like thrush, or suffer from slow-healing wounds. Over a long period of time, high glucose levels in your blood can seriously damage your heart, your eyes, your feet, and your kidneys. These are known as the complications of diabetes. But with the right treatment and care, people can live a healthy life. And there's much less risk that someone will experience these complications. If you've got diabetes, you can find lots of information and support about living with it using our website and helpline. As well as campaigning for everyone with diabetes to get the right care, Diabetes UK fund research into all types of diabetes.
Okay, so that's the first one. So just to kind of piggyback on that briefly, is I'll be mostly talking about, you know, dealing with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, you know, type 1 being autoimmune and having to be on insulin. I'm familiar with it and I'm happy to discuss it in the Q&A if someone's dealing with it. But a lot of the guidance that I'll be giving in the talk is more geared towards the type 2 side of things and the prediabetes side of things. So I'm gonna run through this video again. It's about a minute and a half too. There's a little overlap to what the previous one had and a little bit of new information. I watched them both. I thought it'd be good to share them both.
About 90% of people with diabetes have type 2 diabetes. If you've got type 2, the insulin your pancreas makes can't work properly, or your pancreas can't make enough insulin. And we all need insulin to live. It does an essential job. It allows the glucose in our blood to enter our cells and fuel our bodies. When you have type 2 diabetes, your body still breaks down carbohydrate from your food and drink and turns it into glucose. The pancreas responds to this by releasing insulin. But because this insulin can't work properly, blood glucose levels keep rising, so more insulin is released. For some people with type 2 diabetes, this can eventually tire the pancreas out, meaning their body makes less and less insulin. This causes even higher blood glucose levels. So what does this mean? Well, as your body can't get enough glucose into your cells, a common symptom of type 2 diabetes is feeling very tired. Other symptoms include needing to wee a lot, feeling extremely thirsty, cuts and grazes healing slowly, and getting infections like thrush. A lot of people don't get any symptoms or they don't notice them. Some people don't think the symptoms are important, so don't ask for help. This means that people can live with type 2 diabetes for up to 10 years before being diagnosed. And over a long period of time, high glucose levels in your blood can seriously damage your heart, your eyes, your feet, and your kidneys. These are known as the complications of diabetes. But with the right treatment and care, the effects of diabetes and high glucose levels can be managed. So if you've got any of these symptoms...
All right, so that was the main pieces of it. Okay, so what the main takeaways I get from that video, which I really liked about it, is that it really kind of goes into the aspects of how and what's really going on inside of our body, so that we do need glucose. Like, that glucose is the ability for our body to produce energy, but the regulation of it and how it gets into the cells is really kind of what becomes dysfunctional. And in type 2 diabetes and starting on in prediabetes, that your body is just not effectively getting that glucose into your cells. And then kind of your pancreas starts to work harder to try to produce more insulin to get it in, because the body is sending a signal saying, hey, we need more glucose, it's not getting in our cells because it's not working as effectively. And then eventually the pancreas can burn out, in essence, what happens. So you're just revving the engine too long and too hard. So again, that's kind of the type 2 diabetes perspective versus type 1, which is more autoimmune, where your body kind of attacks the pancreas, your own pancreas. And that's a whole different story. But in the end, both cases that the pancreas stops creating insulin. So you need the insulin from an outside source to help get the glucose into the cells. So as far as diagnosis or diagnosing prediabetes or diabetes, usually it's diagnosed through 3 common ways, and oftentimes they'll use different or multiple paths to confirm it. One is the hemoglobin A1C. That's just a measure of what percentage of your red blood cells have glucose attached to it. Typically normal values is less than 5.7%. So there's always some glucose attached to some of your blood cells, just as you're living. As that number creeps higher, between 5.7 to 6.5% of your blood cells, then you're in prediabetes, and then 6.5% or more is considered diabetes. The reason why A1C is taken every 3 months, generally, if you are being tracked with it, is because that's how long most of your red blood cells live, the half-life of your red blood cells. So then your body's, the older ones are dying off and the new ones are coming in. So it's a new way to check, in the fresh batch of red blood cells in your body, how much of it has that coverage. The next one is the fasting glucose, so pretty much taking glucose when you're fasted. With that, it's really looking at, okay, you're fasting, how much glucose is in your blood. And so that would be less than 100 is normal, 100 to 126 is prediabetes, and over 126 is diabetes. And then lastly, there's something OGTT, or glucose tolerance test. That is a situation where you're being given a specific, usually a sugary drink of sorts, of a specific amount of glucose in it, knowing it's going to spike your blood sugar. And then what they're testing is, over the 2 hours after taking that drink, how quickly can your body clear that glucose from your blood. And so if your body is working effectively and efficiently, it can take your blood sugar and get it down below 140 within those 2 hours. Prediabetes tends to be between 140 and 200. And then diabetes, if you can't clear it, to get your blood sugar under 200 within those 2 hours, typically that's where they're going to use. So again, it can be a combination of factors for diagnosis and then management. So that's the situation with diabetes itself. A question I'll often get is, can I cure my diabetes? And so the idea of curing versus managing or reversing, I think sometimes it's a question of terms more than definite, just terminology. So once you have gone down the path of having less effective use of insulin and the pancreas is working harder, it keeps you're still more sensitive to it if you kind of go off path. So the great thing is, if you have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes and you live a way that's healthful, you're active, you're eating well, you're doing all the right things, you can get your blood sugars into generally pretty reasonable numbers. But you don't get the same kind of leeway or buffer for someone who doesn't already have it. For someone who doesn't have diabetes, they can probably get away with like eating crappy for longer and not being as active for longer, and they have that resilience still built in. That doesn't mean eventually they couldn't get it, but for someone who's already been diagnosed with diabetes or prediabetes, you have less of a buffer to go on eating poorly or not being active for a while versus someone who doesn't have it. So you just don't have that much leeway with it. But again, I want to emphasize, you can do many, many things to manage it, live healthfully, not suffer from those side effects or those long-term effects. But again, it requires more mindfulness. It requires more consistency than someone who doesn't have diabetes. But again, there's a lot we can do. So, which often leads to, from the nutrition side, is there a diabetes diet? So actually, I'm going to go back 1 second before I go into that. I want to stop here for a second. Does anyone have any questions about diabetes, the medical condition, the etiology, like kind of what causes it, before I go into the nutritional piece.
Yeah, how much is genetic and how much is due to lifestyle?
That's a really good question, and I can't give you an exact number. You know, I think there is definitely a genetic predisposition for it, so some people are more susceptible to it, whereas others are not. You can probably look at friends, you know, other people just in your walks of life. I'm sure you can point to some people who are overweight and live very unhealthily and they don't get it, and other people who do get it. So there's there's definitely a genetic predisposition. You know, I can't say that, you know, an exact number that it's 70% of it is our choices and 30% is genetics. I'm not familiar with that number, but I can definitely say there is a genetic potential, but that two things. Number one, that doesn't mean you're definitely going to get it. It definitely means, like, you know, you are at greater risk if you kind of don't live a healthful life or lead to issues that or make choices that are not necessarily the most healthful in regards to diabetes risk. But I wouldn't say you're necessarily sentenced to it. But there, for some people, genetics can be a factor. I hope that helps. Okay, cool. So again, as more questions come up, I'm happy to chat about it. So is there a diabetes diet? And, you know, saying, you know, if I have diabetes, I should eat this way, or I should eat just these foods. And the truth is that there isn't. If you go to the American Diabetic Association, there is no one diabetes diet, which is kind of like a great thing. Actually, I'm gonna step back here for 1 second before I dive into details, because there's many ways to get there. I kind of tell people there's kind of structure and guidelines saying, like, these are generally the ways we want to eat for a healthful diet, but as far as specific foods or a specific type of diet that must be followed, there isn't. So what I'm going to go into now is kind of some of the guidelines around eating healthfully for prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and then talking about how these guidelines can fit into different styles of eating. So as far as carbohydrates or carbs go, again, carbs are our primary source of fuel that our bodies, our muscles, and our brains will use. But again, excess amounts can lead to spikes in blood sugar, etc. So I kind of tell people with carbs, it's about, you know, avoiding overeating them while still meeting your exercise demands. So the carbohydrate needs of an individual with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes who is training for a marathon is going to be higher than someone who's just kind of walking around, because they are burning more. So there's still a reality that the more active you are, you will need more carbs to fuel that activity. But again, it's a happy medium. Oftentimes, some of the best approaches for getting the right kinds of carbs in are to emphasize non-starchy vegetables. I also don't want to say, like, actually there's nothing necessarily wrong with starchy vegetables, but they tend to be a little higher in carbs. So emphasizing non-starchy vegetables like greens and tomatoes and asparagus and Brussels sprouts and broccoli and all those types of things. Minimizing added sugars and refined grains. So that's all the obvious stuff, you know, the pastries, the cakes, the cookies, you know, highly processed flours and stuff like that. So again, that's kind of the more obvious, like junky food type things, sodas, etc. And then choosing whole foods over highly processed foods when possible. For example, choosing whole fruit versus fruit juice, choosing brown rice or whole grain versus a refined or a processed grain. Again, the way that those whole foods are structured, it takes them longer to be broken down in your body and digested. So then they tend to not affect your blood sugar as quickly. And even things like sweet potatoes, stuff like that, they are starchy vegetables, but again, they are not necessarily going to hit you as much or as high as something like a sugar would, or a highly refined, you know, bread or whatnot. And we'll talk a little bit more about the finer points of carbohydrate intake in the carbohydrate counting section that I have for a few slides on, so we can get a little more in depth with that. But those are kind of the main things: non-starchy vegetables, minimizing added sugars and refined grains, and choosing real food when possible versus overly processed or packaged foods. Fiber, the recommendation is to eat at least the daily recommended amount from foods and supplement if needed. So the recommendations are 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories that you eat. So it gets a little bit of a pain to say, well, how many calories do I eat a day, and how much fiber do I need relative to that? So I say kind of most people are probably, if you're, smaller, more petite, you're probably eating in more that 1,200 to 1,800 calories a day. If you're taller, larger, could be in that 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day. Of course, it'll be lower if you're trying to lose weight. Generally, most people, even for weight loss, I wouldn't necessarily say going much below 1,200 calories is a good idea unless you're being tracked by a doctor, a dietitian, or someone who's medically making sure that you're getting the right balance of nutrients. But what I would say is, really, if you're just paying attention to getting a good range of fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains, other legumes, so beans, seeds, etc., you're going to usually do a pretty good job of getting in fiber. So it's really, if you can be making sure that a lot of your foods are coming from those types of foods, you're going to probably get enough fiber. And again, if you're dealing with any symptoms of low fiber, like constipation, et cetera, you could always throw in, a basic supplement, a basic fiber supplement to make up the difference. There is some research that shows higher amounts in that basic minimum may be better for blood sugar regulation, but a big caveat is if it's tolerated. If you're used to having this much fiber and then you go up really high, really fast, that can definitely create some GI issues, bloating, diarrhea, stuff like that too. So I kind of tell people, if you do want to try to increase your fiber intake, do it gradually over time versus just shooting up really fast. Protein, again, it's okay to have a source of protein with most meals or snacks. It can be helpful with weight loss. Again, protein helps keep people fuller longer for less calories. So again, whether that's your animal-based sources of protein, which is your fishes, your chickens, turkeys, lamb, pork, beef, and we can talk about the heart health stuff of that, eggs, dairy, and then the plant-based, which would be your tofus, tempeh, edamame, nuts, seeds, whole grains, lentils, beans, etc. The research for that is it's helpful with losing weight, which is helpful with managing diabetes, but not necessarily by itself helping with blood sugar control. In other words, it doesn't necessarily directly help control blood sugar, but it helps with losing weight, which can then help with I think we have some feedback on the line. But it can help with losing weight, which can then help with blood sugar management. And I'll also say, from a protein perspective, that having protein does help blunt the blood sugar spike if you're eating carbohydrates with it versus just having carbs by themselves. So I think there's still some value in it as well that way. My only caveat is one of the side effects of long-term type 2 diabetes can be kidney disease and loss of kidney function. So if you are diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, typically stage 3 or further along, there's often a protein restriction put in place because too much protein can strain the kidneys when you have kidney disease beyond a certain level. There's been a lot of good research that's come out to say if you don't have kidney issues, then it's probably not going to be an issue. I tell people, if you're having a lot of protein, just make sure you hydrate better and just stay hydrated, but otherwise you should be fine. But if you do have chronic kidney disease or been advised by your doctor to follow a lower protein diet for a medical reason, please do so. And then lastly, for fat, low fat isn't necessarily better. In other words, there are some dietary methodologies that advocate for a low fat diet, and they can work, but generally fat isn't necessarily the enemy. But if you are going to choose to eat fats, it's focusing on healthier fats. So your monounsaturated fatty acids and your omega-3s. So again, the fatty fishes, the nuts, the seeds, olive oil, those things are going to be your healthy fats that provide adequate nutrition for your body to help and also to help fight inflammation. A lot of these healthy fats are anti-inflammatory, so they can also help fight inflammation as well. The biggest thing with those is often just portion control. If you can put away a can of cashews in one shot, it's a healthy food, but then portion can make a difference too. Touching on beverages, generally replacing sugar sweetened beverages with water or other no calorie beverages whenever possible is great. There's a lot of discussion about sugar substitutes. So again, like the diet sodas and other things, they can be helpful to reduce overall calorie and carbohydrate intake, but noting that there can be some side effects depending upon your individual tolerance to them. So sometimes it can alter your feelings of hunger or fullness, so you may eat more unintentionally. You may substitute those in for other healthier foods. So better to eat a healthy, nutritious whole food than trying to plug in a diet food. I've noticed both personally and professionally working with people that when you take in like a artificially sweetened food, it can blunt your sense of sweet. It almost overloads your taste buds. So like one experiment I've had people do, and it's quite interesting, is if you do often have these things, have something that's naturally sweet, like a sweet apple or some other sweet fruit. Try it, then have some of your diet whatever, like diet drink, and then about a minute later, try that same fruit again, and it will taste perceptibly less sweet. It's almost like the diet foods level up your body's expectation of a sweet taste. So then something that was originally sweet no longer tastes sweet. So that's another thing to be mindful of. And then lastly, like the halo effect of having a diet, of having diet soda. So again, the story, they'll say, and it's not necessarily true, is that someone will go to McDonald's and order a Big Mac and fries and then get the diet soda and say, well, I'm being good because I'm getting the diet soda. And I mean, truthfully, if someone was always getting the Big Mac and fries and then usually got the regular soda and then chose to do the diet soda, I guess in that instance, it is better. But on the whole, is it actually better versus like making a better choice overall? We don't want to use diet foods as a license to have less healthy foods. So I kind of tell people, if you use sugar substitutes and you use them successfully and they help you stay mindful and stay managed with your eating, sure, I wouldn't necessarily advocate someone to start using them if they are fine without them. Sometimes I use them as a step down if someone's having a lot of sugar sweetened things and need a way to kind of step that down, almost use it as like an intermediate sometimes to kind of wean them down. So again, I just wanted to keep you mindful of that. Alcohol should generally be avoided or consumed in moderation, which is 1 or less for women, 2 or less for men. One thing to be mindful of, especially on the higher levels of alcohol intake, is there can be this thing called delayed hypoglycemia, that the way the alcohol affects the way your body absorbs and manages food and digestion, that later on, this concept of gluconeogenesis, creation of glucose, and then a drop later if you are taking things, medications that mimic insulin, or if you take insulin. So the glycerides, glenides, I have the list, I'll get them later, but there's certain types of medications. Let me see, sulfonylurea, so glimepiride, glipizide, glyburide, and meglinotides like repaglinitide and etaglenide. Again, these are the kind of medical names for these medications. If you're taking those kinds of things that will actually actively reduce your blood sugar, then you just want to be mindful of taking alcohol. Things like metformin tend not to have as much of an effect like that directly, because it affects your blood glucose in a different pathway, not one that actually acts like insulin to push it down. But again, I think the main takeaway for that is, let me just pull that up again, sorry, is don't start drinking if you're not already drinking. And if you're drinking, you don't need to have a lot. I think probably the best approach. Touching on vitamins and minerals, supplements are really only advised, at least from a research perspective, supplements are really only advised in the presence of a deficiency. So if you go to the doctor for your physical and you're noted to be deficient in vitamin D, then taking a vitamin D supplement makes sense. As far as supplementing things prophylactically, again, it's not necessarily proven to be truly effective. Ideally, if you're getting regular physicals and lab work, you can kind of you can stay on top of what you might be deficient in. One thing to note is that you should assess your vitamin B12 levels at least annually, at least once a year, if you're taking metformin, which is a somewhat common medication to go on in earlier stages of diabetes or prediabetes to help with insulin sensitivity, because metformin can affect absorption of B12. And if you are found to be deficient, though you can usually get either an injection or high dose oral, high dose take by mouth supplement for it. So again, just making sure if you're not being checked, if you've been on metformin for a while and you haven't had your B12 checked, it's good to just stay on top of. Routine use of chromium or other herbal supplements like cinnamon or curcumin or aloe vera is not recommended as a treatment for high blood sugar. In other words, if you are taking that saying like this thing is going to act like a medication to treat my high blood sugar, there really isn't good research to show that that can do that. That being said, there has been some light research to say it could help, meaning in the context of overall eating. If you want to put cinnamon on your oatmeal, if you like cinnamon, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have it. You can totally have it. You can have curcumin is the active compound of turmeric. So if you like turmeric as a spice, a lot of spices have a lot of anti-inflammatory and healthful benefits anyways. So I wouldn't shy away from using spices in your cooking and your eating, but just not as an actual medical treatment. So when you take all of that and you put it together, there's lots of actually different types and styles of diets that have been shown to be helpful with managing blood sugar and managing diabetes. So whether it's the more Mediterranean style with the fresh fruits and veggies and fish, whole grains and nuts, vegetarian. So again, there's lots of different ways you can have, more plant-based approaches of eating to eat healthfully. When they talk about low carbohydrate diet in the research for managing diabetes, they're talking about having less than 40 to 45% of your daily calories from carbs. That's not keto. That's not super low paleo. That's not a lot of those very low carb diets we're talking about less than 20% of your daily intake coming from carbs, and even some of the ketos we're talking about like less than 5%, 8%. To truly be ketogenic, you're taking a very small amount. So really what they're talking about is if you are the kind of person who eats like a lot of carbs all day, you're having toast with breakfast and you're having a sandwich with lunch, and then you're having a lot of grains and pasta with dinner, and you snack on fruit. And it's just like if a lot of your food is coming from carbs and you're not necessarily super active, getting that amount a little more down to even, again, just reasonable portions can go a long way. And I'll show you a graphic representation of that, what that might look like in the next slide. DASH, the dietary approach to stop hypertension. Again, it's a lot of basic, eat your fruits and vegetables, eat your proteins, keep sodium low. A lot of those approaches are very successful. Low fat as well. So like the Ornishes and the Predicans, they're effective. They're just much more restrictive diets. They're very stringent. So again, I kind of tell people like, you got to choose an approach that works best for you in the long term, because choosing something that's going to work for you for 2 months and then lead to rebound weight gain or lead to loss of a healthy way of eating is going to probably cost you more than just trying to find a good approach the first time gradually, versus kind of crash dieting or yo-yo dieting, which can make you end up losing muscle mass, gaining more fat, and actually leading to a more compromised metabolic system. So again, it's better to do it right the first time, if you can, than to try to rush things, for sure.
Vegetarian, low carbohydrate.
Oh, say that again?
And DASH and low fat. So fat is not good.
So these are all 5 different types. So DASH and low fat aren't low carbohydrate. These are all different styles of eating that could be used for managing blood sugar and in diabetes. So did that answer the question? Okay, if you have another question come up, definitely let me know. What I wanted to quickly address was, so a nice approach, and I think
No.
the American Diabetes Association did a great job of putting together kind of the diabetes plate method. And I think it's a really simple but effective tool of understanding how should I build my plate or make my plate when I'm trying to put together a meal. So again, if you look at half the plate is non-starchy vegetables. So again, the salads, the veg, the broccolis, the asparagus, etc. Quarter of the plate is carbohydrate rich food. So the sweet potatoes, the rices, etc. A quarter of the plate is protein. So you see the chicken, meatloaf, tofu. You can even do like stir fry combinations where like the bulk of the stir fry is veggies, a little bit of rice, and in the veggies you got chicken or tofu or something like that. You could do stew, same thing, like a nice big veggie stew with some beans or lentils and as your protein, and you can always put it over. You could either put in things like potatoes or sweet potatoes as your carbohydrate food in the stew. You could put it next to some whole grain, and then drinking water or 0-calorie drink as well. So that's a really kind of good, simple approach to having a balanced plate for healthful eating. So I think one thing is, I'm not sure if people had a chance to like kind of write down what they're eating for a couple of days prior to this, but if not, you can do it subsequently. Getting a sense of like, how are you eating now, and then how does that stack up against some of these recommendations? Are there any places where you can imagine making a change, 1 or 2 changes consistently to kind of get yourself closer to this approach of eating? I'm happy to chat about this for a couple of minutes if people have questions or thoughts about it. If not, I can continue going as well. Okay. Cool. All right, so I'll keep going. If anyone does have a question, definitely let me know. So now, managing carbohydrates. So now I'm going to kind of do a few slides just digging into like carbs, carb counting, what are carbs. So I think there's 3. So one thing to keep in mind is there's 3 main types of carbs or carbohydrates, and carbohydrates is just a type of food that we eat and the types of foods that they come from, and that they're often used as energy in our body. So there's starches, which is complex carbs. And what that really means is just that the carbohydrates themselves are found in complex chains in the food. So your body has to spend a little more time and energy breaking them down. And those things tend to be found in like starchy vegetables, beans, whole grains, things like that.
Oh, okay.
Your question?
I think some people are not muted, so we hear their conversation. That's what's happening.
Got it.
Can
Gemma,
you ask everybody to mute?
Yeah, Gemma, would you be able to All right, cool, thank you. So yeah, again, if you do have a question, feel free to unmute. And then on the flip side is the sugar, the simple carbs. So things that are more more easily digested, more readily digested. So again, the obvious ones would be things like the refined sugars, the refined flours, those things that are just like really processed, and we know, okay, your body will soak them up real fast. But there are also whole food versions and nutritious versions of that as well. So things like fruit, dairy, yogurt, etc. The kind of natural sugars that are found in those foods are a little easier to absorb. However, those foods, the natural versions, tend to be paired with things like fiber and protein that help slow down how fast they're absorbed. So oftentimes I'll tell people you don't have to stay away from those foods in total. Really, I kind of say just if you're going to have fruit, maybe have it with a little bit of protein or something else to help slow down the absorption of it. If you're going to have yogurt, it's usually not too bad because you're getting some protein with it. Or you could always pair with a little bit of a healthy fat, a little sprinkle of almonds or something like that. So again, I think there's a lot of nutrition and nutrients you can get out of these foods, particularly these whole food forms. But understanding that they can be absorbed a little faster. And then fiber. Fiber is found within carbohydrate containing foods, and those and fiber typically is not like digested for calories by the body, but it is used to feed your good gut flora, so keeping your gut healthy. It's used for kind of going to the bathroom regularly. It's good for just helping slow down absorption of foods and keep a lot of your bodies functioning well. So making sure when you're choosing foods that they are high in fiber. So again, fiber-rich foods are going to kind of be your starches, your whole grains, your fruits, your vegetables, etc. Will have fiber in it. So I kind of tell people, you can have a mix and match of these things based off what you're doing, and use that diabetes plate method as a really good driver of how much of each to have. And then of course, sugar alcohols and sugar substitutes, those are, again, tend to be little, like, not all of them are non-caloric. So some of the sugar alcohols, they'll be called like erythritol, malitol, xylitol. They are usually absorbed less, like less calories, but they're not always 0 calorie. A lot of the sugar substitutes, like your equals and sweet and low and stevia and monk fruit now and all those tend to be 0 calories. But again, for certain people, you might be sensitive to these foods. They might upset your stomach. They might create bloating. And now some of these manufacturers are also doing like blends where they'll like Truvia, where they'll blend regular sugar and stevia. So it's a lower calorie thing, but it's not non-calorie. So the manufacturers are getting creative with this stuff. Let's see. There you go. So there's a few ways to go about how do I count carbs or manage my carbohydrate foods. And this is the simple method. And I like to kind of make like a pyramid where the base of the pyramid is where the most of it's coming from. And then you filter up to less and less towards the top. So the bulk of your carbohydrate intake is going to be coming from that whole unprocessed non-starchy veggies like lettuces, cucumbers, broccoli, tomato, green beans, asparagus, all those things. The next level up would be whole, preferably minimally processed carbs like starchy veggies, like your potatoes, your corn, your peas, fruit, beans, and whole grains. And again, that's that quarter plate. And of course, as I say that, they don't have to be separated on the plate. You can commingle them, but just thinking about a portion perspective, that's what we're aiming for. And then lastly, at the top is really kind of the least amount or used sparingly is refined processed carbs with added sugar like soda, white bread, sweets, snack foods, etc. So I think it's about striking that balance. Can I never have a cookie again? Probably you can get away with having a cookie now and then, but I think it's really where does it fit into your overall diet eating approach, how often you're having it, how much you're having, and are you able to, with a certain style of eating or a certain approach of eating, still manage your blood sugar. So if I eat well, all these things at the bottom a lot, and I have a cookie a few times a week or a little piece of cake at a birthday, and generally my A1C numbers are good, my blood sugars are good, then fine, that's great. It's really saying what can you achieve with your overall eating approach, and then not completely beating yourself up if you do indulge occasionally. It's about finding how often you can indulge while still getting the healthful effects that you want. So to very, very briefly go into the idea of carbohydrate counting, which is often done when someone's dependent on insulin, so that someone is putting in insulin to absorb the glucose that they are eating. It's much more specific because their body isn't really helping at all. They have to do it all themselves. So this is the case with type 1 diabetes, and ultimately you could end up in insulin dependent diabetes for type 2. If you hit that point where the pancreas burns out and stops making insulin. Typically what they do is they'll call something called a carb choice, which is in essence 15 grams of carbohydrate, which is usually equivalent to about a cup of fruit or milk, half a cup of a grain, slice of bread, give or take. There's thin slices of bread, thick slices of bread, but equivalent, give or take. So again, when you're putting together a meal, you can say, okay, how many choices of carbs, like what foods am I going to eat and how many choices are there? When looking at a food label, you would need to look at the total grams of carbohydrate and then the serving size. So if we look at this label here, we'll see that the serving size of this cracker or cracker box is 15 crackers, and that 15 crackers are 22 grams of carbs. So that means one serving, which is 15 crackers, is about 1.5 choices of carbs based off the 15 grams per choice. But that's for one serving, but there's 14 servings in the box. So if you get into a kick and you have like half the box or a third of a box, like, and you're like, oh my gosh, then it's a lot more, of course. So being mindful of that, that's how you would read the nutrition fact label. There's no best number of choices to have per meal or snack. That again, based off your body size, activity levels, all these things. Generally, the range is typically between 2 to 5 choices per meal or snack, depending on the type of diet you're following. If you're following a lower carb versus a more moderate carb, how active you are, the more active you are, the more carbohydrate choices you might need. People who are just kind of larger or taller might need more calories, so they might need more carbohydrate choices. So typically they'll, men who tend to be bigger and taller and et cetera, just naturally will usually have higher carbohydrate choice recommendations, but not always mandated. So again, that's the range, but it's really individual based off how you're feeling. And so really what we want to emphasize is that you want to track your blood sugar response after a certain meal, or your energy levels, or how you feel. And then you can adjust based off how you're feeling. And the other thing that's super important is that when you eat other foods, protein, fat sources of healthy fat, that will slow down how fast the carbohydrates are absorbed. So if you have like a huge bag of grapes by themselves, or like 4 cups of watermelon when it's nice and fresh in the summer and it's really juicy, that by itself will spike your blood sugar faster than if you had, let's say, some grapes and a little bit of low-fat cheese, or did it on a salad with some, did like a watermelon salad with a little bit of olive oil and some mint and whatever else. And so that if you're adding other foods that share the digestion process, it can slow it down to some extent. So again, if you're managing your blood sugars and watching it, because you're dependent on insulin, you'll see the blood sugars adjust. If you're not tracking your blood sugars regularly, you can also go by your energy, if you're crashing, etc. So to kind of summarize, I like to have people ask, okay, carb questions for when you get to a meal or a snack. What is my carb choice? What am I going to have for carbs at this meal or snack? And where is it on the pyramid? Is it the base of the pyramid, the non-starchy veggie? Is it that kind of core of the plate, that middle of the road, the whole grain, the starchy veg, the fruit, the dairy? And then what is the portion? How much of it am I having? Is it, a cup, which is like the size of your fist? Is it, 1 slice, or is it a large amount? Of course, the larger amount, the more it's going to impact you. What other foods am I pairing with it, which would then slow down the absorption? Am I having a source of fiber with my meal or snack? So again, if you're choosing carbs that are good sources of fiber, your fruits, your vegetables, your beans and legumes, and your whole grains, that'll also help slow it down. And then how do I feel afterward? Good energy, not feeling low, and then not that crash afterwards. So you're not getting these spikes and crashes. Again, you could always, if you're testing blood sugar, you could actually get the numbers, but then if you're not testing blood sugars, it's about that awareness of feeling good energy, feeling good, but not feeling like jittery or crashy or those up and down mood swings, and then getting those hunger pangs afterwards. You want to get off that roller coaster. You want to try to feel like satiated and steady over time as best as you can. And then last but not least, and then I'll turn it open for questions after this, is weight management and physical activity. So research has been very good with showing weight loss, if needed, meaning if you are, kind of in the overweight or obese levels of body weight, that weight loss can definitely improve your A1C levels, so your blood sugar control levels, reduce your cardiovascular disease risk factors, and improve quality of life. Even as little as 5% weight loss would be beneficial. So that means if you are considered overweight at 200 pounds, losing just 10 pounds can be shown to be helpful. If you're overweight at 150 pounds, losing even, again, 7.5 pounds can be helpful. Research does show if you need to lose more weight, in other words, if, once you get into a normal body weight, then you don't necessarily need to or should lose more weight. Again, it's an individual thing, but generally once you get to the normal range, I wouldn't necessarily advocate for more and more weight loss just for the sake of weight loss. But if you are at a place where you do know you need to lose a significant amount of weight, 10 to 15% of body weight loss has been shown to be the most beneficial. That if you can get up to there, but I don't want you to feel like if you can't hit that number, then you're not getting anything. That's not true. Again, even as low as 5% can create positive changes. And so I kind of tell people, I'd much rather see you take it gradually and lose a little bit and keep it off than lose a bunch and regain it, because that yo-yo dieting is really the worst that can happen because of how it negatively impacts your lean muscle mass. It can negatively impact your bone. It can negatively impact your metabolism. So again, slow and steady, I do think will ultimately win the race if you can kind of create a system that works for you. Again, those at healthy weight should just be active. Aerobic activity, RT is resistance training. So whether it's, whether it's weights, sit to stands, just something where you're bearing some weight and getting some load onto your muscles and onto your bones. That alone, that activity, independent of weight loss, has also been shown to improve insulin sensitivity and overall health, strength, and function. So again, being active, even independent of the weight loss, can be helpful too. For the nutrition, I really say keep it simple. Less is more. Sustainable and positive. In other words, choose things that are going to help you stay positive with yourself. It's not about judgment. It's not about making yourself feel bad that you missed something or did something wrong. I really use the phrase a lot. There's no such thing as failure. It's only feedback. In other words, anything that doesn't work or leads to a non-ideal result, take that and learn from it versus making yourself feel guilty about it and say, how can I make things better for myself? Because ultimately that's what it's about. And then exercise, I tell people, especially like if you're getting started again, build gradually. Sometimes it can be easy to think about what you did, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, and say, oh, I want to do that now. Truthfully, your body remembers what it did pretty well up to about a month of in the past. So in other words, you should look back to what you've done in the past month as an indicator of what you could possibly start doing now, not beyond that. And so that's a good thing to keep in mind. Choose things that are fun, because I think if you do things that you enjoy, you're more likely to stay consistent with it versus something that feels like a slog. Breaking up long periods of sitting, there's been some good research showing now that if you sit for like multiple hours and you don't move, it can really have an impact in your kind of blood sugar control during that period of time. So just even getting up for a couple of minutes every hour and just take a little walk, can be helpful. More if you can, but certainly even a couple of minutes can be helpful. And then moving after meals. If you eat, movement actually in that post-eating time period helps with the absorption of blood sugar because you're using your muscles. It helps with the absorption of triglycerides. So if you have any heart disease issues or high triglycerides, it can help with the absorption of that as well. So again, just even taking a little walk, moving around a little bit can help, in that kind of post-meal time as well. Here are some great resources if you want to learn more. I think the American Diabetes Association has done a great job of creating a very user-friendly site. Lots of information, but presented in I think, a very accessible way versus just a ton and ton of text. I think is good. Diabetes UK, that is the group that I got those initial videos from. I did a lot of searching for good videos that talked about it, and I found that they probably did the best job that I could find. The Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, which is the group that accredits registered dietitians, the CDC, and the NIH as well. So with that, thank you. I'll go back to the resources. well. So I am happy to field any questions. And I know we just got like a minute or two left, but I have a couple extra minutes to stay if people have questions. And then I will make sure that these slides get sent out to everybody so you can have a copy of them. So so the resources and all that is there for you.
Yeah, I have a question. How do you test for diabetes? What kind of medical test? Is it just the regular blood work? And my second question is diabetes linked to age or to heart disease? Because I noticed that a number of people who have high blood pressure also develop diabetes. Thank you.
Sure. So it's a really good question. So the first question as far as diabetes is, I'm actually going to share my screen again just to go back to that one slide. Because typically diabetes is diagnosed through one of these approaches. So either your A1C levels, so it's a blood test. So all these are done through testing, like blood tests. So the A1C level you would typically get at like your annual physical, and usually comes back as a number. Usually, you know, if it's normal below 5.7, if it's higher than that, pre-diabetes or diabetes. Fasting blood glucose. So usually, if you get your labs done fasted, that will be another factor that they're going to see how much glucose you have in your blood. And then if they suspect that you might have diabetes, sometimes they'll ask you to come in for what's called an oral glucose tolerance test, where they would have you come into the office, drink a very sugary drink of a known amount of like sugar, and then test your blood sugar response over 2 hours. And if it doesn't come down fast enough. So usually they would diagnose it after seeing a few of these things be too high. So yeah, these are common things that can be tested usually when you go for your annual physical with your primary care or your internist. So usually they're just checking them, you know, over time anyways, like even, you know, even when you're everything from physicals when you're in the teenage years through adulthood, they're usually checking these things. They usually don't necessarily become an issue until you get older. So to piggyback on that with the concept of age and related diseases, you know, kind of wear and tear on the body, including like metabolically, just occurs over time. So in other words, you know, you can get away with eating a lot of crappy foods when you're younger because your body still has a resilience of like pancreas dealing with it and buffering, et cetera. And just I think the main issue is like as we get older and if we make choices that are not necessarily the most healthful, eventually just like a car's brakes that just keeps get used over and over and over again, it can start to wear out. So I think there is this link of it being at a greater risk for it as you're older, but not necessarily that age itself is a risk factor. Age is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, but not necessarily purely for diabetes in and of itself. However, again, a lot of it is more just based off the fact that like just like miles on a car, we just get more miles on ourselves and there's more potential for things to impact our bodies. There is links between things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease because of the different parts of the body that are influenced. So again, your heart affects your blood, as does diabetes, et cetera. So there are some connections to them. And some of it is that the question that was asked earlier, like, is there a genetic susceptibility? Some people can develop high blood pressure and never get diabetes. Other people may get diabetes and not. But a lot of times they can go hand in hand, especially diabetes and then cardiovascular disease, because when someone gets diabetes, one of the side effects is it can hurt the little blood vessels in your body. And that's why those long-term complications like heart disease, kidney disease, loss of sensation in your feet and eyesight, those are areas of your body that have a lot of small blood vessels that could be damaged by by having too much glucose in your blood. And so that's why those things are often associated. But on the bright side, if you help manage the blood sugar and the diabetes, that can help reduce either A, the likelihood of getting those if you can catch it early, or B, if you are dealing with some of those symptoms, you can reduce or minimize how much it progresses. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to field. And then also, if you have any other subsequent questions, you can message me or you can message Gemma, and she can send questions as well. I'm happy to be a resource. Cool. Well, if there's no,
Sorry, I don't know if I missed it. Just a reminder, if you want to give them the reminder about the office hours, the 14th.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll wrap up this. So one of the things I'm going to be starting or seeing if there's interest is, Gemma, remind me, I think it's going to be April 14th, right?
Yeah, April 14th. I think you said 11 to 11:30.
11 to 11:30. So I'm going to see if there's interest in a office half hour to start. Just so on Wednesday, April 14th from 11 to 11:30, I'm going to be like on a Zoom, but rather than having it be a prepared talk, it's going to be more of a kind of an opportunity for people to come with questions, feedback about the things they've learned either from this talk, or if you were on my previous talk for eating nutritiously for strong bones and muscles. And then I know Gemma has recordings of those. So if you want to get a playback of that talk I gave a couple weeks ago, you're welcome to take a look at that. So I'm just aiming to be a resource for you and for the group at the Isaac Center, is saying, hey, if you want to field any questions or talk about what's working for you, what's not, discuss any barriers or challenges you're facing, that I would just be there for a half hour to anyone who wants to come in and chat. Again, if there's just a couple people, then you get some nice one-on-one time. If there's a lot of people, I'll try to field as many questions as I can in that time. And then, if we have too many people, it's a good problem. Then I can always just figure out ways to get all of that addressed in the future.
How can we access this? Would you send us the link?
I think it'll probably, Gemma, I'll confirm, but because I guess we'll just use the same link for that one.
Yeah, I'll make sure to change the information. I'll be adding it to the calendar when it comes time to. And I recorded this meeting, so when this is done, Jason's gonna send me the materials, and I'll make sure to send it out how I have been, how I did yesterday with the YouTube links.
Cool. Yeah, so we'll definitely make sure that